program explores complex financial crimes and their global impact. The views expressed by guests do not necessarily reflect those of the producers and/or the host. From boardroom decisions to shadow banking, from Wall Street to the dark corners of the internet, this is From the Hill to the Trenches, the search for justice. I'm your host, Dorothy Hill. As a former Goldman Sachs associate who has worked in 5 countries, including Germany and Japan, trained in compliance by a former agent of the FBI, and advised both global banks and government agencies, I've witnessed how money moves through legitimate channels and shadowy networks. In this podcast, we investigate the world of financial crime, otherwise known as fin crime, compliance, and the pursuit of justice. We talk to the insiders, the regulators, investigators, compliance officers, and occasionally the reformed criminals who understand how financial systems can be exploited and protected. From money laundering to sanctions evasion, cryptocurrency schemes to corporate fraud, we follow the money trail and examine the human impact of financial crime. Whether you're a finance professional, work in compliance or technology, or simply care about transparency and justice, join us as we navigate the complex intersection of money, power, and accountability. This is From the Hill to the Trenches, the search for justice. This is the kickoff of the new podcast based here in Babylon Village, New York, called From the Hill to the Trenches, the search for justice. I am joined here today by my good friend, Chuck Harold, who joins us from
Apache Junction, Arizona, deep in the heart.
Chuck and I have worked together in the past on several fronts, namely having interviewed quite a few cybersecurity and information technology executives, startup founders, funders within the cybersecurity and data privacy realm. And I really enjoyed watching Chuck's journey from law enforcement into media, and also the amazing work that he's done for his various companies and entities. I'll let Chuck give a brief background, and then we're going to delve into the first topic today, which is elder abuse. Take it away, Chuck.
Well, I'm blushing probably. I can't top that. But I was a police officer for a long time, had my first computer in 1984, and thought, you know what, this is going somewhere. We should look at these computers and use them a little more. And I've always had a computer and always been fascinated by technology. And I used to bring my computer to the police station, write reports, and the chief would say, get that out of here. We don't need things like that. So as I transitioned from law enforcement into private security, I ran Fox and Disney Studios for about 10 years. I ran 2 guard companies, did the Academy Awards. I started saying, you know what? I know a lot of stuff. I should put this on some kind of tape. And I went down and rented a studio in Los Angeles and did a podcast. They used to rent out space at old radio stations. And I just kind of started doing that. And now I'm up to 3,300 podcasts, something like that. Video casts, vlogs, what do you want to call them? SecurityGuideTV.com. And Dorothy and I have connected, and she used to be on my show at Black Hat USA. And we just had this connection about technology and investigations and justice. And I thought, I'd love to come on your show and talk about this stuff today. So I'm really excited to talk about this topic.
Thank you. So just for the audience's edification, we will be covering quite a few topics as we delve forward. We will be addressing compliance, anti-money laundering, also the overall collaboration of law enforcement with what we call anti-money laundering and compliance specialists on Wall Street. That's really my bailiwick, my domain. I've spent over 25 years on Wall Street working in consulting, risk management, with a focus on money laundering investigations and compliance. We'll also delve into the world of sanctions, both U.S. sanctions and sanctions that are instituted by other jurisdictions and countries around the globe. And then finally, we'll have entire segment on health and wellness, as well as mental health and resilience. So you can see that we are covering quite a wide range of topics, again, from compliance, investigations, cold cases, all the way through to like what really impacts us as individuals, as families, and communities on a daily basis, namely our health, our wellness, good sleep, healthy eating habits, how we interact with others. We're not going to delve so much into spirituality. However, later this year, we may have someone come on to address those issues and how it all fits together. So let's dive right in to the topic of elder abuse, which came across my screen literally when I was informed by the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners that this is a growing area of criminal activity. And when we think about criminals who engage in abuse, we often think about, sort of a sweatshop or some type of organization or large boiler room, so to speak, in, say, Southeast Asia, who's calling on elderly individuals in the United States, claiming to be, for example, a grandson who has been at a traffic stop and arrested and needs monies funded, directly funded into an account. Certainly that's still occurring. However, the complexity of elder abuse has now really evolved into a deeper examination of how that occurs within families. And those of you who are listening and have had a case of elder abuse in your own respective family, this may resonate with you. So again, we'll kick off with how do we define elder abuse? And then also later, I'll be speaking about some of the free resources that are available to people to help them navigate and resolve elder abuse issues.
I could help you define this a little bit. Elder financial exploitation is kind of the new acronym, buzzword, right? That's defined under federal statutes. It's not a law, right? The federal statutes say the state should have a law about this, and we'll give you some money to help you set these laws up. But the stats on this are unbelievable, Dorothy. And I never let facts get in the way of my podcast, as you know, so don't misquote me on some of these things. I might get a little bit wrong, but they're not a lot wrong. Estimates are from all kinds of financial and elder sites, right, that the losses to elders for this type of fraud, I'm going to call it extrinsic fraud, and I'll define that in a second, are between 28 and 32 billion, with a B, $billion a year. That's what elders lose to this sort of stuff. And about 65%, maybe 50 to 65%, are committed by family members. That's who's stealing the money from elderly people. So I'm going to tell you a little story real quick about how I got involved in this. My mom has a trust. It's a family trust established from my great-grandfather going back to the turn of the century when he established a whole bunch of grocery stores in Los Angeles. He had the biggest grocery store chain in LA for sure, and probably the country at the time, 125 stores. Knew all the grocery guys, and he set up this trust, and it's been passed down. So now it's passed down to my mother, and she gets the trust, and she decides to put a family member in charge of this. And we said, don't do that. That guy's not too bright. It's not a good idea. Fast forward, we ask the family member, hey, can you give me an accounting of the trust? We got to put mom in a rest home. She's got some issues. Oh, there's not enough money in there. Well, yeah, there is. There is a lot of money in there. And we want to get an accounting. That's what you're supposed to do. He wouldn't do it. So what does he do? He sues my mom. This is lawfare. You guys have heard this term before, right? He files a lawsuit against my mom and says, you didn't sign a release of liability for my accounting, which mom's not required to do. And I'm going to sue you. He hires a law firm in Seattle that charges $850 an hour and runs up almost $400,000 in attorney fees. And then says, you better settle, because if you don't settle, we're going to go to trial, and then I'm going to charge you more. He gets in a position where he says, I'm going to make you guys a deal. I'll only take $60,000 more. I've already taken $100,000, and we'll settle the case. They start negotiating with my mother, who by this time has a brain injury from her kidneys failing, and she has certified medical dementia. And I tell them, you can't do that, and they keep doing it. And the stupid judge, who should get her law degree tuition back from Bolt Hall, decides it's okay to negotiate with an elderly woman with dementia and have her agree to a settlement agreement that she never signed, Dorothy. This was the ruling by the judge. She never signed it. And now they're trying to take this money. Now, this is going to be a federal case. I'm working on that. It's going to be a big deal. There's a lot of crimes involved here. But here's what extrinsic fraud is. And I want everybody to understand extrinsic, E-X-T-R-I-N-S-A-C, not intrinsic. Extrinsic fraud. Let me read this, guys, to you. Extrinsic fraud, in a legal context, refers to fraudulent acts committed outside the formal proceedings of a court, but which have significant impact on the outcome of the case. It involves intentional misrepresentation and concealment of material facts that prevent the party, that's my mom, from fairly presenting the case. This is distinct from intrinsic fraud with an I, which is fraud committed during the proceedings. So what does this guy do? The trustee, he decides, I'm going to send mom a letter from this big law firm in Washington and say, if you guys don't sign a release, we're going to sue you. Sounds okay. That sounds legal, right? He's a lawyer, right? Well, guess what? He's not a California lawyer. It's a California trust. He sends the letters to mom in Oregon, Washington, Arizona, and California, where all the brothers and sisters live, citing California law, which is a misdemeanor practice of law without a license in California, by the way. And people that don't have lawyers like us said, oh, well, that sounds pretty scary. I guess we better do something about that. That's what extrinsic fraud is. Law looks legal, but when it's outside of court, that's the abuse. And, you know, there's a thing going on in Washington State. It's called TEDRA, the Trust Estate Dispute Resolution Act. It's the only state in the country that has this act that allows the state of Washington to litigate anybody's trust from any part of the country and apply their law to it. And it's a big, I describe it as the ambulance chasing of trusts, because most trusts say if you have a trustee and you hire an attorney, the attorneys get paid, just like the insurance company says the attorney gets paid, right? So that's what's going on in a nutshell. And before I got into this, I was like, no, this can't be really happening. But that $32 billion a year, that's what's happening.
A quick question for you, Chuck. That number that you quoted in terms of losses, is that U.S., that is 50 states plus territories like Puerto Rico, or is it global?
It was U.S., and here's the problem that they state with these. And if you go to different websites, you'll find different ranges there. But that was, I think it was from, ARP or somebody reputable. They don't know. People don't report it because they don't know they're getting ripped off. You get a lawsuit from somebody that says, oh, I'm in a lawsuit. I'm not reporting that as abuse because I think he can legally sue me and take my trust money. That's the problem. See, that's why it's tricky. They do know of the things you talked about before. Those are more recordable, right? So you steal grandma's credit card. We know the granddaughter stole the credit card. That's different sort of thing. This is subtle, right? And I'm a little rusty.
But yet excuse me. So it is subtle. But what I wanted to say is that the entire piece of money laundering investigations ties in so neatly, because if you think about the fact that a family member would ascertain that fraud is being committed and knows, let's say, for example, I'm not going to name any banks because obviously banks are also the victims of this because they're being used as a conduit, right? To channel and transfer those funds. So let's say it's Bank XYZ in New York. Well, a family member would be able to go in to a branch manager or speak to a compliance manager and file what's called a suspicious activity report. The family member doesn't file it, but compliance does. That's my background in terms of ascertaining, does this rise to the level? Is this a minimum threshold amount? And let's say it is for $2 million. Does that warrant a suspicious activity report being filed? Well, if that family member also has a criminal record, right, what we call a rap sheet, then very well could be submitted to the U.S. Department of Treasury to a database called FinCEN, and then it proceeds to a master database that can be reviewed by approximately 350 law enforcement agencies. This could be, for example, NYPD. This could be the FBI. This could be an authority in France, for example, if the money is being transferred to a French bank. And that is where the rubber hits the road in terms of this type of elder financial exploitation being converted to an actual, what we call incident, and then being investigated properly, then to proceed to what we call prosecution stage. However, as you rightly pointed out, it's so much work in those beginning phases. It has to be significant amount of money to warrant resources and people's time to be focused on it. So the bottom line is that family members are very frustrated that A, they don't get the type of support that they would expect from both law enforcement and the banks, and B, it takes an incredible amount of time to resolve it, if it is resolved at all.
Now, Dorothy, I'm going to hire you to work on my case because the thing you just said, and you don't know much about my case. So this is interesting that you're saying these things. So I'm not naming names. Let's just say the fifth largest financial institution of its kind in the country got a report from me that said, hey, this trustee has my mom's money in your bank. And by the way, he's taken out $2 million in home loans with only $900,000 in equity. And when I added it all up, you guys, and said, what's the bottom line here? He has $635,000 in negative equity. Well, guess how much money he had on deposit for my mom's trust, Dorothy? Oh, $634,000. What a coincidence that is. That's a mathematical impossibility, right? I just put it in a spreadsheet, and this is what it spit out. I tell the bank, you got to file a suspicious activity report. No, we don't. Well, you do, as a matter of fact, because I think he's pledging mom's trust funds as collateral for those loans, because how else could he get loans with a 400% loan to ratio value funded? It's not even legal to fund somebody that much money over your collateral in your house, right? So I hear you. I think I'm going to send this to FinCEN, and maybe a couple other places to start. But the frustration is people look at this and go, blink, blink, that hurts my head. There's too many numbers. I put it all in a spreadsheet. I did the math on it. I proved the mathematical impossibilities. I did that heavy lifting, which most people just can't do. And I don't know how I even did it because it hurt my head for about 6 months. But I kept saying, there's something there. It doesn't look right. And when you add it up, that's what happened. So there's something here. And I think your podcast addressing these issues is going to be a great service nationally and, well, worldwide, actually. This stuff goes on so much. And the extrinsic fraud is all run by the lawyers because they want to get paid. And nothing in the case I had anything to do with the facts that I demonstrated were proven. It had to do with attorneys saying, am I going to get paid? How am I going to get paid? Here's a motion to get paid. That's it. It's all about attorney's fees. Yeah, it's just sick to my stomach.
We talk about victim rights. We do have, for example, in New York State, Office of Special Crime Victims. I think at least, I don't know the acronym off the top of my head. However, they compensate victims of certain crimes. If someone were to go to that unit in Albany, New York, which is our capital of New York State, for those of you who are listening from overseas, it won't necessarily proceed to a payment to that victim. So what, like you said, it has to go through the court system. Yeah. Similar to a contested divorce of custody, who makes the most money? The lawyers.
That's it.
And someone said to me this morning, guess who makes the money? The lawyers' children, because they benefit.
Oh yeah,
indirectly or directly.
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
so it's not necessarily the best interest of the elderly person. It's not necessarily the best interest of the child. So we will be delving into issues like that. I wanted to ask you, however, and this is really the tough, what we call two roads diverged in a wood. I took the one less traveled by. That's made all the difference. You touched on the difficulty of most people to document a case like this. My experience working with people who have been exploited and victims, it's very difficult for them to write about their own case. So in effect, they have to hire a writer, and most likely it has to be a lawyer. But lawyers don't necessarily have the financial skills to whip together a spreadsheet. Right. So it's a rare breed of person, right, who can document both the legal issues, reference case law, but also include, for example, a schedule of all of the financials. So how would someone who's facing this similar issue that you have proceed if that person doesn't have that skill set? And how much money should they expect to be able to have to spend just to document the case details, to then hand it over to the banks and also hand it over to law enforcement?
So I'm no genius, right? My mom didn't raise any dumb kids, but I don't have college degree. I don't have any fancy accounting background, nothing like that. But I'm tenacious. If I get after you, that's it. It's not going to stop. And I use common sense. And here's what I mean by that. I believe every human being on earth has the ability to do what I did, but do they have the patience? That's the secret right there. Okay. So when you face these issues, let's say you're a victim, you're the grandma, the trustee, no, I'm getting all the words mixed up. You're the grantor of the trust. It's your trust, right? And you want to figure out what's going on. And you say, I can't do this. I got to hire a lawyer for $800 an hour. I say, you know what? Not necessarily, because the lawyer's not going to understand it any more than you are unless we put it in a palpable format. Here's the simplest thing you can do. Understand that you're telling a story. The law is irrelevant to that exercise. You need to tell the story, and then somebody's going to say, look at all these things here in the story. I'm going to attach some laws to them. That's how the process works, okay? Don't be overwhelmed and intimidated by lawyers saying, well, legally, section A, B, C, D. No, your story is what wins the case. How do you do that? You put everything in chronological order. I have over 15,000 documents in this case. And everybody wants to file it like this and file it like that. I said, nope. You're going to put the date at the very first file name, 2025-05030. Then you're going to put a description as you would describe it in plain English. This is my stupid nephew's loan for this address, because that's how you would look it up. And then you search for it. Now, here's the secret. In sorting data for databases, right? Use fields and tables and such, right? You can query and find this stuff in a database. So that's complicated. Here's the way you're going to find it. You're going to put this all in your Windows directory, and you're going to sort it by the date. And the reason I have you put 2025-05-30 first is that's how it sorts. If you put 1/5/25, it sorts 1 first, then it sorts 01, then it sorts January. It's not going to be chronological. Year first, month, day. You sort that. And then when you read everything you save, you can save it in 5 minutes. You can save an email. You can save a scan. You can take a picture with your phone now. Get this. Open up your phone. There's a scan feature on your phone. I had a $5,000 scanner 25, 30 years ago. Scan it with your phone, uploads it to your directory, boom, put the date on it. Now, when you open up all those files chronologically, that's your story, rolling out in chronological order. And then as people read it, they go, oh, this guy gets hired, and he starts to work, and then he takes out a loan. Wait a minute, then he takes out another loan. Wait a minute, he took out 5 loans in 5 months. I never saw that before. It wasn't in chronological order. And the facts for prosecutors, they love it in that format, because they got to tell the story in court. You can't jump around like a Netflix special about, I get confused on those. I don't know about you, Dorothy, but when the backstory, and they cut in the middle of the science fiction movie and go back 45 years. No, just do it chronological for me, right? And that's how most people think. Yes. They think linear. So that's my best advice. And you know what? Anybody can do that. Grandma can do it with her phone. I taught my mom to do it with her phone. Oh, Charlie, I just got this document. Mom, open up your phone, turn on the camera, take a picture, send it to me. Boom, done. Very difficult to go back and reconstruct all this stuff. So that's how you do it. And then you take, and it's funny, Dorothy, when I started doing this, 3 of my mother's neighbors, when she told them what was going on, said they wanted to hire me to do it for them. I'm not a lawyer. I'm just an investigator, right? They want me to gather the data, put it together, because they were all getting ripped off the same way by some family member. That's it. So
Incredible.
That's the best way to do it. And you can start and not spend 1 penny. And then when you hand that to a lawyer, they go, oh, I don't have to do all this work. This is a prosecutable case, or it's, if it's criminal, or it's a lawsuit, whatever it is. You got to have the evidence, and that's it. And the evidence is your story, supported by things, email, a bank record, a statement from somebody. That's it. So there you go.
Question for you as you were going through this, and I've worked many years on Wall Street in financial institutions, and compliance of documentation is crucial, whether you're trading derivatives or you have a loan agreement. How did you acquire the data and documents regarding the personal loans? Because there are privacy laws within each state
that
would prevent like a non-legal agreement party to obtain access? And just if you could speak to that, please.
Yeah, so it depends on what you're accessing. Good point. Washington's very restrictive. Washington had one of the first COVID cases, and my cousin actually, I think, was patient zero, if I recall correctly. And after COVID came out, they changed all the reporting privacy requirements, right? So you can't get birth certificates, you can't get death records. It's all secret, squirrel, private. Well, guess what? That's all a bunch of BS under federal law, which I'll get into later in the show. But there's plenty of public records. So I can't get a copy of this person's home loan application. That's private. But guess what? Deeds are recorded publicly, right? So you just look up the county where you are online and say, deed search, and you find it. There's also public databases that are available for public records. And here's a little secret people need to know about public records. So when I get a public record search and I find everything I can about Dorothy, you've seen me do this, Dorothy. You know what's available out there in public records, right? It's a lot of stuff. That is all come from your credit report that the credit companies sell. So you have the top of your credit report, which is where Dorothy lives, what she does, and where she works. And the bottom of the credit report is the numbers, the bank accounts, and all that kind of stuff. I can't see that. I can't see the bottom of the credit report. But the credit companies sell the top part of it. Where you lived, where you've been, how many times you moved, all that kind of stuff. You get that in the public record. That you use that as your first place to search, and then go find the corresponding county record to get the trust deed. And then you get the trust deeds, and you start putting it in chronological order. And when I downloaded 55 deeds, I went, how does this guy have 55 deeds on 3 properties? What? Because he kept borrowing and borrowing and borrowing and borrowing money and building up this huge pile of equity cash when there was no equity in the houses, right? So most things you could do would be to search Google first. You'll get a lot of basic stuff from Google. There's subscriptions to places you can do. Just type in public record searches. You probably see them pop up on your phone all the time. Hey, find out all about Dorothy. Click here. I wouldn't do that. I would Google reputable companies. I think there's some, I think Truth Finder's okay. There's, you don't talk about Dorothy. There's a few of these public places that you can find records on. And then you use that to find the corresponding county record. Now, let me tell you a little secret thing about deeds, everybody. So if you're going to go off and look for deeds to find out where your third cousin twice removed decided she's a beneficiary of the trust and you've never met her in 30 years, and she squirreled away some money and bought a house somewhere, there's a database called MERS, M-E-R-S. I wish I could remember what it stood for, but my memory sucks lately. It's a
We'll put that in the notes. Yes,
it's a private database.
Yes, and it's used to investigate mortgage fraud and also very big cases, which we could discuss on a separate episode.
So what they say is we're just a good old-fashioned private company, private database. We don't have anything to do with what people do to record. Well, in my particular case, this guy, when he did all these loans, right? He doesn't record them in Washington State, which is, by the way, required by Washington law to do. He goes to the MERS database, he finds a trustee in Florida and a notary in California, and records his deed to the MERS database. Well, that's fine. Except when I go to Washington to look for it, I can't find it because it's not in Washington's property deed record, right? And then he gets another loan, and when they go to give him a loan, the lender, let me search the deeds. Oh, I guess you don't have any other loans out here. There's nothing recorded. Gets another loan and stacks the loans. It's called loan stacking, right? And 50 times this happened, right? With all this negative equity. So there's a database nobody's ever heard of. If you're in the business, you have, but just Google MERS. And you can put in a person's name and search. You can put in an address. You can put in a deed number, I think. And you'd be really surprised what you find in there. And yeah, that's all part of this, obfuscation of records.
Yes.
So there's a lot of stuff out there. And I would encourage people to not be discouraged because you don't know anything about it. Because I just taught myself because I'm curious. So if you're curious and you stick with it and just ask questions, with Google, maybe you use an AI program like, Google has AI. Everybody's got AI now, right? That's a little more in depth. And you can start putting this together in chronological order, and you're going to see patterns that you didn't know were there. And that's the whole secret to cracking this stuff. Extrinsic fraud, my
Question
friends.
for you. So I'm thinking as you were talking, yes, absolutely. Forensic fraud investigation, or we also call it forensic accounting. You were speaking about a house that's used, the equity is used as collateral.
Yeah.
Now I think about a similar case, but on Wall Street and our financial world of the hedge fund LTCM, long-term capital management. So I had been working at Goldman in London when that basically blew up. And what had happened is that the hedge fund uh, posted the same collateral to multiple lenders, which
Yes.
they're not allowed to do.
That's right.
And then when it came time for them to pay margin loans, all the banks literally had to meet. The representative of the banks, that is, and ascertain that there had been so much collateral risk that it was not sustainable. So that's a good example from Wall Street about posting the same collateral for a margin loan. How does this family member continue to cover the monthly loan payments if there are multiple loans? Is it like he takes the funds from one to pay the next one? I mean, how does he possibly manage that?
I think that's part of it. Again, I'm not sophisticated like you are on that, and maybe I'll run the spreadsheet by you. You can help me figure it out. But my best guess was, and by the way, I did that analysis. It's called loan to payoff ratio and something else, right? So I used some queries and I said, let's do the math. If I took out all these loans, and let's say the property of the houses went up, so they sold a couple of houses, right? So we have the loan to ratio value for the purchase price, loan to ratio value for the sales price, two different analyses, right? Because maybe his house went up. I said, let's do a loan to ratio value for sales price based on negative equity. Could he have paid off the houses? And the answer is no. There wasn't enough money to pay the house off. If he sold them at a higher value, he still got a negative equity of $600,000, more or less. What's happening? And I didn't understand the math on this because I got to run it by my son with the math degree. But when you take out this cash, because it's a HELOCs loan, home equity, it's just money. Here you go, take the money. You could put it in a bank, you could deposit it somewhere else. You could use it to pay back part of a loan. But my best guess is if he recorded these things through MERS and it's offline and the lenders don't know about it, it's like a pyramid scheme. You pay off one,
Absolutely.
you take off a loan, you pay off another one, and eventually it catches up. I mean, eventually you got a call on it. Now, the other thing they talked about.
People can do that and make a lot of money if you're in
Yes.
an interest rate environment of interest rates dropping, right? Because you're
That's
going to
right.
refinance, get a lower interest rate, and you're going to take that difference. We have been in a rising interest rate environment or steady interest rate environment, which begs the question again, how is this all conducted? So obviously, again, just wrapping it up, you discovered the crime, you documented what you had, you used various public resources to create additional documents. You obviously had access to like email communications, which are within the family.
Yeah.
You
Not much though. Not much, by the way.
No, okay. No.
Yeah. So because this guy didn't say anything, he's supposed to answer questions as the trustee. He didn't say anything. He lawyered up for 4 years and refused to answer one question. So I had to get this stuff myself. So, but what you did have were the things in the family that said, oh, I remember I was at a party once and he said so-and-so. And by the way, not the best evidence, can be hearsay. Doesn't matter.
Yes.
If grandma told you something 5 years ago, write it down. Let somebody as a trier of fact decide if it's valid or not, right? It may be the key.
Will that hold up in court? Yes or no? Right. So
They
then
can.
we also spoke about, right, exactly. So often, hearsay, and that's actually another interesting point because some judges, I know for a fact here on Long Island where I am, they will take hearsay as fact and they will actually implement that. They will institute it or incorporate it into a judgment. And another judge may look at that same legal document and render a decision to overturn it because, again, it was hearsay. So if we look again at the remedy, which is really important in your case, it is, like you said, documenting all the evidence, knowing that you have or may have recourse through one or more financial institutions that transfer, either receive funds and or send funds involving the trust. Third, you now know that there's a database run by the U.S. Department of Treasury, FinCEN specifically, where banks make a determination if a financial crime rises to the level of submitting such a what we call SAR, suspicious activity report,
Yeah.
that is then received and analyzed, accessed by approximately, again, 350 law enforcement agencies, for those of you who are joining late. And then finally, you pull it all together for the prosecution. Now, I know that in other instances of elder fraud exploitation, you can actually walk into your county level district attorney and file a complaint. If there are one or more public entities involved, it could fall under what's called the Public Corruption Integrity Bureau.
Oh, yes.
Right? That's one. And then the other path that it would follow is, again, financial abuse. I believe more and more district attorneys and state attorney generals are paying close attention to the elder fraud and elder financial exploitation topics. And the more knowledge we have, and both garner that knowledge and share it across the families who are impacted by this, the stronger we will be as an anti-fraud community to also institute stricter laws. So if someone gets a slap on the wrist for committing such a crime against a family member, which, as you know, impacts other family members in
Right.
multiple generations, they'll continue to do that. However, if they know that Joe Smith in the next town went to jail for 5 years for stealing assets from his great grandmother's estate, then that person may be less apt to commit the crime. What do you think about that as a deterrent? That is stricter laws.
So I would encourage everybody to retire to Nevada because Mom has recently retired to Nevada, and we put her in a rest home there. Finally got the guy to kick up some money for the rest home. It's pretty expensive. Unfortunately, she's going to run out of the money since he's taken so much money out of the trust for attorney's fees, where she would have had 10 or 15 years to live. Maybe she's got 5, and we got to figure out something else. But having said that, from my review, Nevada has the most how do you say it? They're the most restrictive elderly abuse laws. And that's not the way to say it, Dorothy. How do I say it? They're the best elderly abuse laws. Nevada can say, you know what? We don't like that decision over there in that other state. We're going to take this case over and we're going to prosecute that guy over there for elderly abuse because you contacted grandma, my mom, in Nevada and tried to negotiate a settlement with her when she had dementia. That's not only a crime here, it goes across federal jurisdictions and, all those due process clauses and things you got to do, and they'll go after it. So they're looking into this case now saying, wait a minute. No. You can't negotiate with an 89-year-old woman with dementia and say that she verbally agreed to a contract, pal. You can't do it. And our laws say, here's why. They really want, I'm saying this only half funny, they want grandma's gambling money, right? I mean, grandmas always go to Vegas and win $1,500 every time they go. And that's only half funny, but there's a big retirement community in Nevada. And you know what? They're protecting the elderly people and their interests. And so that's the way you look at it. You hit a very interesting point. You said when there's a public entity involved, you can contact that other, I forgot what you said, the unit or refresh
Public
my memory.
integrity unit or public corruption integrity.
Okay.
Yes.
So here is what most people would think. Well, I don't know, I'm in this lawsuit. There's no public entities because it's, my nephew and his lawyer, and that's a private law firm, and you got this guy over here. But guess who the public entity is in my case? It's the friggin' court. The court has made so many violations of constitutional due process laws that they're the public entity that's going to get in trouble for this. Okay, and people have to rethink that because you walk into court and you say, "Well, it's a court." Here's something else you got to think about. An attorney is an officer of the court. All right. They are bound to act in accordance with your constitutional protections. And again, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not saying this as a lawyer. I'm saying this as, a policeman who had to take away people's liberty and follow the Constitution, that's what I did. I took my job very seriously. And I didn't stretch facts and anything to put somebody in jail. If they got away with it, they got away with it. We'll get them next time, right? That's not what it works in the civil division. They get you by taking your money. And I would argue that,
Yes.
I might rather sit in jail for 6 months than have my entire financial life ruined and forever, right? Because they just think, oh, I'm taking your money. So what? That's your problem. So think about lawyers as officers of the court. They're bound to not lie, make up baloney, and engage in extrinsic fraud. The court is a public entity that you can file and say they made all these incorrect rulings. They violate my constitutional right of due process and so on. One thing I'm coming up with on my case is I pled the First Amendment. And people said, well, wow, the court went blink, blink, right? Under the First Amendment is really what they call the right of free association. The reason you can have free speech is because I can associate with you, Dorothy, and you and I can have this podcast, which we couldn't have in Cuba, right? That's just not how it works down there. So when I exercise my right to associate with you, it gives rise to the free speech. Now, if I can have free association with you, what else can I have? I can have free disassociation. I can say, I don't want anything to do with that trustee over there, regardless of what trust law says, regardless of what the trust instrument says, that he's bound to be my trustee and only he can control my trust. It's an interesting case. I think it might be a case of first impression, that we might be able to say, listen, when he's engaged in a bunch of nefarious, that's what the judge called it, by the way. The judge called his activity nefarious. We know what that means, right? What judge would say that in public court? So if they think it's nefarious, don't I have a right to free disassociate and not have you be my trustee without a bunch of court nonsense? Interesting topic. Again, not a lawyer, not giving legal advice, just talk about my own case.
Right.
So a lot of moving parts here, but there used to be things called private attorney general acts way back in the day when I was a policeman. People could file a private attorney general claim against somebody and have the DA pick it up, prosecute if they thought it was good. They've gotten rid of a lot of those laws. The lawyers don't want you having your own ability to do stuff. It's kind of sad. So
Another public entity that we haven't mentioned yet, and again, it's at the federal level. However, each state has its respective trustee laws and sets regulations, is the IRS. So if there's a tax impact of a withdrawal from a trust, or the funds are impacting someone's inability to pay taxes on, say, an investment. So let's say your mom owns 500 acres in North Dakota and she has a real estate bill that's due. And then she goes to the trust to make that, twice per year real estate payment on raw land or commercial land for farming, for example. Then the funds are not available to her. She can make a claim to the IRS. It's similar to innocent spouse relief. I don't know the legal term for this particular IRS matter. So again, IRS is, one would argue, one of the most powerful enforcers. And I'm just mentioning that for the audience, don't forget the power of the IRS when you're dealing with a fraud case, because they have so many investigators and national as well as international reach to also determine where funds have been transferred. So when you look into a large RICO case or organized crime case, and you scroll to the bottom of that U.S. Department of Justice, New York Southern District memo about a prosecution, often you will see IRS mentioned as one of the public entities or teams that worked on a particular financial fraud case. I'm just mentioning that.
So let's say, without saying, I've talked to IRS investigators over my career. They're very good at what they do. They understand what they do. Here's a hypothetical situation. Let's say a trustee decides to take money out of a trust to pay his attorney fees, and it turns out that wasn't legal under all kinds of statutes and laws and case rulings and stuff. Is that now considered his personal income? It might be his personal income, right? And they do not like people not paying their taxes. The criminal division, they're very good at understanding those sort of things. So to your point, that is an excellent point. And you may find that instead of your lawyer being interested in this, because of all the family nonsense in the trust, The IRS might be interested. I'll tell you who else, Dorothy. This is my personal opinion. I've worked with every law enforcement agency in the last 42 years of my career. To me, the best law enforcement agency is the United States Postal Inspectors. People say, what are you talking about? What do you mean that postal? They actually had the first law enforcement agency in the United States, if I recall correctly, right? So why? Well, here's an example. When this lawyer from the trustee mailed us a letter that said, you guys better sign this release of liability. We're going to sue you. Oh, wait a minute. That's extrinsic fraud. And oh, wait a minute. You're not a California lawyer, so what are you citing California law for? That's a crime. That's mail fraud. Right? He's trying to obtain money from us through the mail. And that law has been extended, if I recall correctly, to include the modern day email and the modern day FedEx UPS, whereas before it was a horse and a mule being delivered to Arizona by the mail, right? So
carrier pigeon,
right? So that's wire fraud is another thing that you can get the Secret Service involved in. The Secret Service is very good at the wire fraud stuff. The Secret Service actually started the people that started the FBI kind of came from the Secret Service, if I recall. That's the investigation lineage of things, right? Postal inspectors, Secret Service, FBI. And, when they email us stuff and do extrinsic fraud, that is also something. So you may find in your particular, let's call it a trust administration case, that traditional pathways of hired a lawyer and spending all your money at $800 an hour to lose all your trust money to the lawyer, send some letters to people, make them interested in all that kind of stuff.
Absolutely.
The loan stuff going on that we're looking at is kind of like, it's not logical. It doesn't make any sense. Dorothy, you and I, we've been good citizens our whole lives. We have good credit scores. You and I couldn't get loans like that. There's no way you and I could get, I don't know, people a penny, and I couldn't get a loan like that, right? So you look at common sense when you look at these things and go, if it doesn't make sense to you as the trustees, or not trustee, you're a beneficiary of a trust or your grandma with the trust, if it doesn't make sense to you, it probably doesn't make any sense. And go through government.
Exactly. It has hair on it. Right. It has hair on it. There are, like you said, nefarious elements. So I thank you so much, Chuck, also for being our first and foremost guest on our podcast, From the Hill to the Trenches. We can provide additional resources to people on our website, which will be launching soon. And in the meantime, I would like to invite you back possibly over the next quarter of the calendar year to address some of the larger, like organized criminal activities that have been going on in the narcotic space together, with either a current or a former DEA agent. And we'll talk about specific cases, like what we call in the trenches here on Long Island and other regions of the country. I hope that you have a great weekend in Arizona, and I thank you again for your time.
Thanks, Dorothy. It was a blast. Anytime I'm going to come on, I'd be glad to do it. Thanks so much.
You've been listening to From the Hill to the Trenches, The Search for Justice. I'm Dorothy Hill. Financial crime, or fin crime, may seem distant and abstract, but its effects touch all of us through market instability, compromised institutions, and eroded trust in our financial systems. If today's discussion has sparked your interest, there are ways to stay engaged. Visit our website, www.hill2trenches.com. That's number 2, hill2trenches.com, where you will find resources, extended interviews, and case studies mentioned in this episode. Follow us on social media at Hill Trenches, that's trenches plural, at Hill Trenches, for daily insights and breaking news in the world of financial integrity. Most importantly, share what you've learned. Greater awareness is the first step toward a more transparent financial system that works for everyone, not just for those who know how to exploit it. Until next time, remember, following the money reveals the truth, and truth is the foundation of justice. Join us again next week as we continue our search for justice in the complex world of global finance.